I'll be honest, I killed the performance review.
I saw this model and I was like, yes, like someone else is out there talking about learning culture and like actually has an operational model that's working.
People need to know, did they succeed or did they not succeed? And if they succeeded, what does that mean for their career growth? And what does that mean for their compensation and promotion opportunities?
I want to talk more about how it's maybe a false target for what we're really trying to drive at, right? Which is learning agility, like as a way to describe it. What does that mean to you? What other concepts do you use to understand that? What are we trying to actually drive towards?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about moving people across that and moving too fast and not getting everybody along for the ride earlier and giving more time to that training and development around this change that we're trying to create, even though there was nothing in place beforehand.
It's a hypothetical, right? If you had to sort of pick one priority as a people leader, right? As a people leader to drive, and those priorities were enabling people to lead through change, right? And then the other one is like retaining top talent. How would you pick that?
Ooh, gosh. That's like, that's really like, having to pick between your two children.
That's why I ask it.
So I would say,
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
Tami, welcome to the show.
hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm in New Jersey. You're joining me there from New York City, it looks like.
I am. I'm in New York City.
Yeah, so I'm excited to dive into this with you. And for my first question, you and I, when we talked about this, you spotted my accent right away. We started to talk about, for some reason, my Octopus Teacher, and you talked about how much that documentary meant to you and kind of resonated with you. I'd love to know what's one lesson or takeaway or something that you do differently now because of watching that documentary.
Well, I think that documentary is a lot about patience and connection. And so I think some of the thing that I take away is that building a relationship and connecting takes time and takes time to build trust. And especially when you're trying to do it with a different type of creature than a human, you have to do it differently and you have to learn their style or their abilities and what matters to them and what they like. But you also have to adapt yourself and then also share what you are. So when you're coming to a relationship, you have to bring both sides to that, what you bring and what they bring. And you have to adapt and they have to adapt. And I think that relationship between the octopus and the actual person shows that emotion, attachment that you can actually have, even by being in different species.
Yeah. Isn't that such a great metaphor for leadership right there, right? I love that you said like the patience and connection. And then that when he did that, the octopus revealed himself, itself, whatever, to him. And that was kind of what the whole documentary was about, is that this creature is actually kind of magical and way smarter than we thought. And, that's also true for leadership, right? When you're working with people.
Well, and showed that the octopus actually craved the connection and wanted it, but was scared and had to figure out ways in order to show or be vulnerable in order to get something back. And you're right, in leadership, sometimes as leaders, we aren't as vulnerable as we should be with our people when we have setbacks. We're usually good about sharing the successes, but we're not always good as sharing what doesn't go wrong, go right. And I think that vulnerability of failure or making mistakes with your teams or really helps build that relationship and connection and offers them, your team, to be able to do the same with you.
Yeah, beautiful lesson. For anyone who hasn't watched it, definitely go check it out. It's quite moving. Yeah, there's a good segue there. So you talked about vulnerability, and I want to talk about. So you're a board member there now at Pagaya, kind of recently, and when we were preparing for this, you talked me through how you had you weren't sure if you wanted to get into that role, and your CEO had to kind of talk you into it and almost like get you to stretch. Can you talk us through that? How did that all go down?
Yeah, so I know most people know me for creating the continuous learning cycle and focusing on learning. And Pagaya, learning is a core value. And at my last year's CLC, as we call it, a continuous learning cycle, we had a conversation about some of my strengths, some of my weaknesses, some of the things I love to do, some of the things I don't love to do, what could be valuable for Pagaya, and what could be a match based on my motivation and value to Pagaya. And I always thought, and I have in my past, always added things onto what I was doing. I never sort of just took a complete break and did something different. I was always just in addition to what my core thing was. And here at Pagaya, I helped to build, as the first C-suite, sort of the executive team, and built out the HR function. And when originally we talked about this new role, it was going to be in addition. And it wasn't, the board wasn't even in the discussion. It was more about doing this chief development officer role of really helping to bring people and organizations to Pagaya across everything we do. And not just for the sake of hiring people, right? It would be more about, focusing on advisors and people that could be great allies and ambassadors of Pagaya, things like that. And I thought I'd get to do that in addition. But come January, he had a new idea, and his view was to do this role right with the superpower and expertise that you have on behalf of Pagaya. You need to be unencumbered to do that. And that means you need to leave the people space. And this was the first time in, 20 years that I was going to be leaving the people space and not doing something in addition. And it did cause me that moment of pause. And that was when he also said, and I'd like you to join the board too. And when I thought about that, it was easy to kind of say, yeah, I want to take the leap. However, of course, there's, you have the butterflies in your stomach and you're concerned, can you do it? It's leaving all the things you've done well and now having to start over and create new KPIs and rhythms.
Yeah, talk about like getting out of your comfort zone and having to learn kind of as you go. What's been different about the role to what you expected it to be coming in?
What's different about it is that it is a very externally facing role. And then it's about connecting dots internally. So my day in the past was very obvious. Like I was either, meeting team members, working on projects, meeting external people to bring to Pagaya, things like that. Now, most of my role is really understanding the direction of the company, where we're going, how we're doing it, and helping to connect that strategy to people externally. So I've become very much of almost an evangelist brand ambassador for Pagaya, and I have to be out there chatting and talking to different people about why Pagaya and how their expertise or their interests can be aligned and work with us. So it's a very different kind of rhythm and expectations. And I have a small team now, so it's the first time in a long time that I don't have a big team. But I have a very strong and mighty team, and they're great. And we have very ambitious goals, and we're trying to shoot for the moon.
That's really cool. And I'm curious, like, what's one thing that for most people listening will have that people background, like you mostly have, that what's one thing that's like that's similar, like you're doing, like it's kind of those same skills are helping you now.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to our first question about the Octopus Teacher, because it's about being a connector and a networker, and learning how to connect and network with people, and build relationship, and not just network. Network is you go to a cocktail party, you exchange some conversation, you maybe exchange LinkedIn's. What I'm looking to do is really build long-term relationships where it's a give and take, and in fact. I'm not looking to ask for anything from the person. I'm looking to help and give, because over time, if you invest in that and you become that giver, eventually there'll be opportunities to take and help and get help.
Yeah. I love that. I love that attitude. And how do you balance that though with the demands of the business, right? Like you need to show results. You need people. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, well, I'll let you know. I mean, I'm still in the early days of it, but
Fair enough.
I think part of it is setting expectations, right? Having clear goals, understanding that when you're building something, you have to, this goes back to our octopus again, have to have
Hmm.
patience because
Hmm.
when you know what you always need to do and you know how to transact and you know what the value is going to be, that's easy. This, I'm creating that now. I'm creating it from
Hmm.
scratch. And
Yeah.
so what it's exciting for me is I love being a builder, and I love being the trailblazers, and that's what it feels like.
Mm.
Like I've been the first chief people officer at many other companies. You're always creating what it is going to be like at those companies. This is now the first kind of chief development officer slash board member, and I'm, as an insider on the board, is a new frontier that I'm sort of paving
Mm.
a way for, and that's exciting. I don't expect I'm going to have tremendous results in the first month, 2 months, but
Mm.
each month will build on itself, and then the
Yeah.
rest will come.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't. I had no idea that the octopus would be the gift that keeps on giving. I'm so glad I asked you that to start, and let's see if we can keep coming back to it.
I
Um,
love the
okay,
analogy.
I know, right? There's so much to learn from that. Um, okay, so let's go back to kind of the work you've been doing for most of your career on the people side of things, and I'm going to we work our way towards a continuous learning cycle. That's, by the way,
Sure.
for people listening, that's kind of how I found Tami. Was someone had posted about that on LinkedIn. I saw this model and I was like, yes, like someone else is out there talking about learning culture and like actually has an operational model that's working. So that's kind of where we headed here. But let's start with when you and I talked, right? That you mentioned how we have this pervasive problem in the industry of managing to the lowest common denominator, and a lot of that starts with the fact that we have these performance standards in place, and we'll talk about how like they're kind of getting away from what we actually want to measure, right? Like, but there's still a reason for those performance standards to be there, right? What are they? And I think it's important for like people to know that. What are they there for? What are they useful for?
Yeah, and so this is a very hard thing to kind of think about across, a litany of different companies and also across, hundreds of years, right? Like, but I would say
Mhm.
that if you go back to the lowest common denominator, like we said, is they were built in a time in the industrial era where in the military they needed to promote somebody, they needed to transfer somebody, and they needed to discharge somebody. So it was
Mhm.
clear you needed to have an evaluation and a review.
Mhm.
Industry largely adopted it as is. And over the last several hundred years, there's been a lot of evolution to it, whether you have ratings, 360s, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think they've largely stayed the same. But there's
Yeah.
still a need, and I agree to this, that people need to know, did they succeed or did they not succeed? And
Yeah.
and if they succeeded, what does that mean for their career growth, and what does that mean for their compensation and promotion
Mm.
opportunities?
Mm.
Or whether they shouldn't be at the company, right? So that's why it's there.
Yeah, and that goes also, like you were saying, in your new role, like the idea of setting clear expectations, right? Like that's kind of the purpose of this. It helps people know, hey, this is how I get promoted. This is how I get pay raises. It's certainly not a one size fits all thing, because anything that's a proxy for something else, it like has its usefulness, but it's also doesn't cover all the edge cases, right? And that's kind of where you see
Mm-hmm.
some of the challenges. But I want to talk about more about how it's maybe a false target for what we're really trying to drive at, right? Which is,
True.
I think what you and I agree is learning agility, like as a way to describe it. What does that mean to you? What other concepts do you
Sure.
use to understand that? What are we trying to actually drive towards?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about learning agility, you're driving towards people being able to evolve, grow, and have greater impact. Um, some might call that reaching their potential.
Mm.
And what companies and HR leaders have done for years is say, we can assume your potential based on what you did in the past. And that's where I have a fundamental disagreement on, because yes, that's going to give you some evidence, but the new problem's not going to look like the old problem. And just
Mm.
because you did it with the old problem doesn't mean you're going to be able to solve it with the new problem. And
Yeah.
having that learning agility is that ability to have all these other experiences that you've done in the past and know which pieces to leverage, which ones not to, which levers to pull, which levers not to pull. and how to have those conversations. So let me give you an example. When I came to Pagaya, we were working on, driving towards potentially becoming a public company. And I was asked at that time to be the, sitting CMO through this process. I've never been a CMO before, never. And so this is a great example of, I'm a chief people officer. I've been involved in comms and PR and all that stuff, but I've never got ourselves ready to announce a SPAC. But there's things from the things that I've done over the past or who I've seen or worked with, whatever, that I can draw from and learn from and know when to ask for help. But the judgment on that was what I used to kind of decipher what do we need to do and how we needed to get through this. And we had 10 days to get this done.
Yeah.
And you just go into leveraging all those things that you have, but then you're also creating new things at the same time. And it's the judgment, which is that learning agility that you're applying in this new situation.
Yeah.
So so I think that's like an example of like what we want for people.
Yeah. And you're doing this now in your chief development officer role, bringing the skills. Like we'll talk about problem solving ability in a second. That's essentially what it is. You're like being able to adapt to problems that you haven't seen before. That's kind of the challenge here, right?
Yeah. If we're only doing the same thing we've done in the past, then that's a different type of company, right? Then you can just be very much like, this is what it is and this is what it is, right? Like, and you just like, it's almost like an assembly line.
Yeah. Your company's in financial services, and this idea of like past performance doesn't guarantee future results, right? Like that common disclaimer everyone knows. Like that's a great way to frame what we're talking about here. That we want people to be able to adapt. Like there's the octopus reference again. Be able to adapt to the environment. And you shared a great analogy with me, or a concept that you said when you were building Pagaya out to hire. You were hiring top performing skiers and asking them to become snowboarders. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
For sure. I love this analogy because when you come to a company and you've been very accomplished in your career, your expectation is that you're being hired for what you did in the past and you're being hired for being that expert skier. And so when you come on board, you just want to show everyone how you ski. But when you come to Pagaya and we're actually building something that hasn't been built before and you're trying to scale it, you have to take that skill and maybe evolve it, adopt it. And I like this idea that you come as a skier, but you learn to be a snowboarder. And if anyone's been in the ski and the snowboarding side, it's very true that they both can go down a mountain, but they're very different. And if you've been a skier, the idea of becoming a snowboarder is scary. It's like you're going to be on your butt. You're not, for 2 weeks, you're going to be pain. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to enjoy it. You might get down the bunny hill if you're lucky. And you may not even enjoy it after 10 days of trying it or even 10 weeks of trying it. But if you stick with it, even though what this is showing is that learning is hard because you have to unlearn some things in order to be a snowboarder. And then you have to learn new things. And then you have to apply different things that you've learned in the past to it. And you have to kind of put that all together to become really good at it. And once you achieve that, you actually can both ski and snowboard, which is actually more dynamic for you and the company.
Yeah, exactly. As a South African who grew up 20 something years and never skied, and then coming here, I totally relate to this because like that was a painful experience learning how to snowboard. But you're right, like that's learning, right? That is learning. There's no other way to learn that. You have to go through the pain. How did you position that to people coming in? Because that's quite disconcerting, right? When you're joining a company.
Well, it's interesting you say, how do you position it? I don't know if we were explicit about it, but what I would say in a lot of the companies I've been at where senior people get, join at a very high level in their career, their expectation is, I'm going to tell you what I did at every other company. So they'll say, when I was at this company, we did, or when I did this at this company, and versus saying, here's how I'm going to solve the problem. So what we did do with people is we had a very rigorous onboarding plan that we did for all of our senior executives. And the first thing we really imparted on people was the first 30 to 60 days, we want you to just listen, absorb, and learn. And that's going to be so hard for you because your expectation is you've read the 90-day book, How to Be Successful. And you want to, my first 90 days, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that to show why you hired me. And what we're saying to them is, we hired you, we know why we hired you, but we want you to absorb us, and then you're going to have greater perspective. So on day 2, day 3, day 4, you're going to know more than you knew on day 1, day 2, day 3, right? And if you are patient, back to our octopus, if you're
Yeah,
patient enough, you're going to learn, and you're going to see that you can actually solve it in a better way with what
yeah,
you've known in the past and what
yeah,
you're seeing.
yeah.
And that's the excitement, right? Do you
Yep.
want to come in and just do the same thing you did at the other company? There was a reason you left.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in that octopus analogy, you talked about both sides being patient, right? The business is also being patient in this case, like letting people ramp up in that way to
Yep.
before they really contribute. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the continuous learning cycle model, because that I think is what drives a lot of this, and what you've used it in where did you actually develop this? Where did you first put it in play?
So I think this has been kind of brewing since my Goldman years, and
Okay.
tweaking as I've been doing over the different companies I've been to, and seeing what works and doesn't work in different companies, whether it was like Apple or Luminar or even Atlassian. And actually at Luminar, I did a version of this, a very lighter
Okay.
version of this that worked very well. But when I got to Pagaya, because learning was so at the core, it just made it so much easier to link it to the culture of Pagaya, and making it something that would be lightweight but impactful was so important. So it is kind of the same thing we're talking about, is like you have all these breadcrumbs of learning over the years, and then you're like, how do you put it together and design it here
Yeah.
differently?
Yeah. Which is okay. So it's that evolution, and now you're using it at Pagaya. Is that right?
Yes, we've gone through
Yeah.
5 cycles.
5 cycle. Okay. So this is part of that performance management cycle. It's kind of part of the performance conversation between a manager and direct report, right? And has it kind of superseded a lot of other stuff? Like, is this the main conversation that happens there at Pagaya?
We don't we I you know, I'll be honest, I killed the performance review in this case. Like, we
Okay.
do not
Yeah.
have what you call a traditional performance review at Pagaya. This is our unique version of it. And everyone will then ask me, well, then how do you deal with compensation and how do you deal with promotion? We do that in a separate process. But this is a feeder for sure. It happens twice a year. And the point of this is really to combine setting goals and expectations with your manager, creating an environment in which you can ask for help and get support for your future goals that you're setting, and with your manager, and then a place for you to reflect and look at what you've learned, both your successes and your failures, and what you can do to replicate those. And what I noticed is a lot of people focus, and they still do in reviews, on what you did wrong. I used to always laugh at how many people, after the performance review process was over, would come in my office to complain how upset they were on the performance review, that were the top performers in the company. And the reason why is because we spend so much time talking about what you didn't do, not what you did do.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And that's a key problem for this process, a key problem. And so I think what we've tried to create with the continuous learning cycle is a place for you to really connect with your manager. So patience, connection, and then to be able to really develop that ability to be honest with yourself about what's working and not working, where you've
Yeah.
fallen on your face, where you were successful. Do you know why you were successful? Most of us probably don't. There's a little luck in
Yeah.
there, right? But it might have been
Yeah.
timing. And how do you make sure you can do it again?
Yeah. I think we talked about this before, but this idea of reflection, like it's so under this, people just haven't built time for reflection in a lot of companies we talk to, and it sounds like that's a core part of this. Self-awareness comes from that as well, which is great. So let's just, for folks listening, what are the 4 areas of the model, and what are the kind of questions that go with each of those?
Sure. So it's a pretty simple model. There are 4 questions. The first one is, what were your significant contributions over the last 3 to 6 months? What have you learned over that last 3 to 6 months, both positive and negative, things that you've done well, things you haven't done well, and why, or why you think that is? What are your goals for the next 6 months? And what support do you need from the manager and the company to deliver on that?
Yeah.
So very simple. That's
Yeah.
1 week. So an employee will fill out their self-reflection in 1 week. Then managers will also spend some time scheduling the actual learning conversation, and they will spend some time putting their own manager reflections together. And then they meet and share the manager reflection with the employee reflection and have a conversation and then decide on what the outcome is going to be and the next steps.
And what does that look like in terms of accountability and like, what does that element look like so that it drives it forward?
So they agree on the final summary together, and then they have goals that they're meeting towards, and then every one-to-one or every month they're checking in and talking about it. When there's a big win or a big loss, there's a discussion about it. And what this has brought, I mean, this whole process takes 6 weeks, maybe 5 weeks total. And it is something that we're very proud to say that over 70% look forward to the next one, that 93% of people have had an open and honest conversation. 83% of people felt they've got meaningful feedback, and 100% of people have completed a self-reflection and had a conversation.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that speaks for itself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, mic drop. Okay, let's people listening are probably loving this idea. A couple of questions that popped to mind, like why is it important to be specific when you answer it? We talked about a little about this, and we talk a lot with our clients about logic versus narrative and how narrative has detail and specifics. And I think you mentioned this, and you had a good example of maybe someone on your team, I think, that had something, and you were like, nope, that's not enough. Like, go deeper, and like, can you talk to that?
So I think we've made this process very lightweight. So when you go and you see these questions, it's easy to just answer very basically. But my view when I talk to my directs is I want you to go deeper and really look at the specifics of what worked well and what didn't work well and what your goals are going to be and why. Because if you're clear about it yourself, then it's going to be easier for you to talk to your manager about it. And then me as a manager is going to be able to help you either achieve it or hold you accountable to it. And then you can understand where you fall short or where you actually were successful. It's harder when you talk in generalities. And I think it's hard also to be more specific. So pushing people to be more specific is important. And what I do notice in this is that people are very open-minded to it. When you think about a normal performance review, people are gaming those systems. They're writing a self-reflection.
Totally.
They're writing the self-reflection as they've won the Academy Award.
Yeah.
and they're doing that because they know that if they do anything other than that, it'll be picked off. So if I'm honest with you and I say, I failed here, you're going to use that against me. You're going to take my comp down, or you're not going to give me that bonus, or you're going to not give me that promotion, and then you're going to ask. So that kind of pulls that out of the system because there's that connection and honesty, and there isn't like a direct correlation to comp and performance. Promotion.
Yeah, and there's a positive element to this, and meaning like there's this, a lot of people talk about this idea of failure, failing upwards, or positive failing. Like it sounds like that's when you talk about the lessons you've learned, both positive and negative, those are also like, it's not like what did you do wrong, it's like what did you learn and are now doing differently because of that, right? Yeah, exactly. How do you deal with, we all see reality a little slightly differently, right? How do you deal with that, where there's like those kind of things that come, where there's an incident and then I draw my reflections out of it. You might not agree with that. How have you approached that?
It's a great question, because I think this is the imperfections of any kind of conversation that you have with any human, right? Maybe it's easier with the octopus because it's a little bit more black and white. Right. But I think you're right. Everyone has what we call their own reality, their own. We're built based on the experiences we've had, the traits we have, all those things that are kind of hardwired in us. And we all see things sometimes a little bit differently. But that's the point of these conversations, is to open those eyes to both sides. Because when you do a review right now, the manager is taking the 360 feedback and they're making an assumption. They're putting together what happened in their mind. They're writing the weather report, but it's not the weather that everyone's seeing, right? And the one thing they're missing is asking the person to have a conversation with them. So what I like about this model is it's almost like you're giving hypotheses out, and you're saying, here's the way you can be better. What if you did this? What if you did that? Let's talk about it. Let's have this ongoing as a conversation, not you really failed at that and you shouldn't do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so powerful. It reminds me of one of my favorite mental models. The map is not the territory, right? So like, yes, maps are useful, but like you've got to go and actually have those conversations. It's messy. It's like you go down dead ends, but that's how you get to the truth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the truth together, because you both
Yeah.
have blinders. You both have
Yeah.
blinders. Um,
Yeah.
and you can make a lot of assumptions, and some people are better than this at others.
Yeah.
And some people make a lot more assumptions that are based on their own value system and not on the value system of the person.
What is one mistake you've made in implementing this model over the years, right? Maybe when you first started, what's one like lesson you learned there that anybody listening doesn't have to make?
What's one lesson? That's a really good question. I think the first lesson was really that I didn't realize how much people are so rooted in still being the skier when it comes to performance reviews,
Mm,
and and that people really still have, from every other company they've been at, this view that you have to have a review and a rating, and without that you can't be successful. So moving people across that and moving too fast and not getting everybody along for the ride
mm,
earlier, and giving more time to that training and development around this change that we're trying to create, even though there was
mm.
nothing in place beforehand.
Yeah,
But the fact that people have vision about what they thought it would be, and helping people to understand what it should be.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. That it kind of gets me into the my next question, which is maybe like it's a hypothetical, right? If you had to sort of pick one priority as a people leader, right, as a people leader to drive, and those priorities were enabling people to lead through change, right, and then the other one is like retaining top talent.
Mm.
How would you pick that?
Ooh, gosh.
Yeah,
That's really like, having to pick between your two children.
you
Um,
too. Exactly. That's why
um,
I ask it. Yeah.
so I would say enabling people to lead through change, I think, is so much more important, because that will then enable people to stay. Most
Mm,
people leave
mm,
companies based on a change that's happening in the company, and their impatience to see through that change and work through that change and accept that change or help to influence a different change.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
would be my view. I think enabling people to lead through change is one of the hardest things, because we all experience change differently and we all evolve through the change differently. And
yep.
a lot of times leaders, we get the information before everybody else, and we're already, as I call us, like we're already that speed swimmer to the new island,
Yeah.
to get to the change, and we forget that we had to go through being the person that said, wait, is there a shark in the water? Should I get in the water?
Hmm.
Or, hey, I want to stay
Yeah.
home and be with my tree and hold on to the tree to this island. And so I
Yeah.
think that analogy of like, when you're making that change, everyone goes through it, even leaders who don't accept the change at first and
Hmm.
want to stay with the current island, not move to the new island, or want to see all the
Hmm.
reasons why not to go to the island, and then want to swim
Yeah.
to the island because they've gotten to the point where they've realized that going to the new island's great, but there's an evolution to that. And if you look at how leaders work, is they spend a lot of time understanding it and getting themselves ready for it. Then they start to communicate and want everybody to just jump in the water with them. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely guilty of that. Yeah.
I'm guilty of it. We
Yeah.
all are. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
enabling people to lead through change, and for people to understand and where they are in that change process, for better or for worse, is going to be better, because then you can understand and learn, for as you're making the change, the things not to do and the things you should do.
My hypothesis is what you just validated there, and I'm keen to see how many people agree with it. Is that you start there, and that leads to retaining those people. You're developing them, you're engaging them, and therefore you're retaining them. So yeah, thank you for that. So okay, last question then from me, Tami. This has been such an enjoyable conversation. What's next for you, and what value would you like to embody into that?
So I think what's next for me is to continue to build out in this new role, and really see how the value of being an insider and a board member, and also being able to um, get the people, I don't know, get this role into a place where it could really have the impact that the company really needs. And so I have a
Mm,
lot of build in me right now. So that's what's next for me, is really
mm,
to take what I've been asked to do, and really show the value it can have in a very different way. And the value that I would embrace on that is I have to go back to patience and connection.
Yeah, love it. You nailed it.
I love that octopus.
Oh, it's amazing. That's a great answer, by the way, and I wish you best of luck in doing all of that. This episode name is coming to mind here. I think How the Octopus Killed the Performance Review.
Yes, I love it. It's taken all its tentacles and thrown it away.
Exactly. This is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. Tami, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure as well. Thank you for having me and being such a great host.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.